Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. You may have seen a couple of my previous videos in which I used flex rubber from Let's Resin to make really cute squishy toys. Well, I loved it so much, it got me thinking about ways I could use it differently. And so today I want to try combining some cured flex rubber with some polyurethane resin for a completely different effect. Let's see what happens. Here's the mould I'm going to be using today. It's the smallest cuboid mould in a set of 3 from Let's Resin. The moulds come with wooden supports which are really useful to make sure that the finished piece doesn't distort under the weight of the resin inside the mould. So to try out my idea, I decided I wanted to make a fridge magnet. And here I have some very strong magnets, which I got from Amazon. And I'm just attaching the magnets to the inside and keeping them in place by adding one to the outside. With hindsight, I wish I'd added one to the middle, because what happened was, because I had the magnets underneath on the corners, the weight of the resin made it sag on the, in the middle of the finished piece. And so when I tried to put it onto the fridge, it wasn't flat, it was slightly bent, and the magnets weren't coming into contact with the fridge properly. So if I did this again, I would put one magnet in the middle as well. Once the magnets were in place, it was time to add a very thin layer of resin just over the surface of the mould to keep the magnets into place, and as something to put my flex rubber on in the next step. I needed to make sure that the base of the mould was covered before I added my flex rubber pour, but that will make sense soon. Now, because I was just doing a very thin layer and because I didn't want to wait hours and hours for it to cure, I decided to use polyurethane resin from Let's Resin, which cures in about 10 minutes. Another reason I wanted to use this is because I'd had it in my cupboard for a long time. It was out of date and it was starting to go a little bit yellow. I don't know whether you'll be able to tell from your screens, but yeah, it was yellowing a bit. So I thought it's time I started using this and get it used up so it doesn't get wasted. So it just worked out right for me today with this project. One thing about this polyurethane resin is that you do need to make extra sure you've got good ventilation. You should always have good ventilation with using any kind of resin, but the polyurethane resin is more harmful. This one is actually quite surprisingly good in a way, because whenever you get polyurethane resin you will find that it's very smelly, but this one isn't. I was really surprised about that. But yeah, don't be deceived by the fact that it doesn't smell. Make sure you have a mask on and good ventilation. You only have about 2 minutes of working time with this resin because it cures so quickly. So it's best to do it in small amounts because you don't have long for mixing it. If you've got a large amount, make sure you've got a good, strong, fast mixer. But yeah, it didn't take long to mix because I had such a small amount. And I just put in enough to cover the base of the mould. And then here we are 10 minutes later and we're ready to add my flex rubber pour. So because I don't have any flex rubber at the moment, I'm using one I made previously. So before I do the next step, let me just show you part from another video where I mixed up my flex rubber so you can see how it works. So here's the flex rubber kit that I had at the time, and here you can just see me measuring it out 1:1 ratio by weight and then mixing it just in the same way you would with epoxy resin. But this isn't resin, this is more of a silicone than anything else. And so yeah, I poured it into the mould just like with resin. You do need to put Vaseline on the inside of the mould first, and then it comes out of the mould and you can cover it in flocking or in mica powder. I use the chameleon powders for my green one. Okay, we're back to the present. Let's get on with the project. So here's my squishy paw, which is actually still quite tacky on the back. If it hadn't have been tacky, I could have removed the mica powder from the back with some isopropyl alcohol, but it was fine. It stuck to the resin absolutely fine. And the reason I did that first layer of resin was so that I could stick the paw to it, and when my fridge magnet is finished, it will be completely encased in resin and it wouldn't be able to fall out the back. I didn't want a hole in the back with the squishy exposed because then it could have come out. Right, one word of advice if you're using polyurethane resin is to be organised before you mix it. You will only have about 2 minutes of working time once it's mixed. And yeah, I wanted to be sprinkling on some powders to make it a bit more interesting. This polyurethane resin looks clear when you mix it, but it cures to be an opaque white, and I thought it might be a little bit uninteresting. So I wanted to sprinkle powders onto the top as soon as I'd poured it. That's why I'm making sure I've got everything ready. So next I measured it out just in the same way as before. I'm not going to show you it all over again. And once I'd measured it out, I just gave it a really good mix and I was ready to pour. I wasn't sure exactly how much I would need, so it was a bit of a guess, and unfortunately I didn't mix up enough, so I had to be really speedy and mix up some more when I realised that I'd run out, but it was okay, I managed. When I poured the resin, I needed to be very, very careful, and it's important to use a silicone pot that you're comfortable with for pouring, something where you feel like you might be quite accurate with it. The reason being, I needed to go around those pour pads but not over them. I just needed to encase the base of the squishy but not the pads, and so yeah, that was a bit of a tricky one, and I was very careful and took my time as much as I could with this fast curing resin. It worked out in the end. So next it was time to add my pigment to the top. I'm using the olive coloured chameleon powder from Let's Resin, and I've just put it into a little sieve that I've got, and that fits onto my pot of gold powder that I use quite a lot. But I just borrowed the lid with the sieve because it's a nice fine one, and I didn't want big clumps of powder landing on the resin, and that little sieve is really handy. So yeah, that's why I did it like that. And surprisingly, the powder that I'm sprinkling on at the moment is the same powder I used on the squishy paw. But because I'd poured the flex rubber with black pigment in, it was a black squishy paw which I then covered with the olive, you get a different colour if it's a black background. And so you'll notice that it looks completely different. They don't match, and that's because this is going to have a white background. But anyway, I've put my sieve back onto the top of my gold, and I'm just putting a little bit of gold pigment powder around the edges to add a bit of interest. So here it is 10 minutes later, and it's quite a transformation, isn't it? Once the resin goes white, it's really different. And you can see how the base of the paw was completely hidden by the resin. You can't see it, and you've just got those cute little pads poking out. Okay, so the theme for my fridge magnet was already kind of decided by using a paw print, wasn't it? I had to do something related to it. And so I decided to do a picture of our beloved cat that we used to have called Mitch. He was such a lovely boy, and I thought, let's have a picture of him on there. I printed it out on my laser printer onto some decal paper. Is that how you say it? So I think some people say decal, I say decal. I don't know the right way of saying it, I don't really care. Anyway, I've printed it out. I decided to do it in black and white. I don't know why, I just thought it might look good. And I'm kind of roughly cutting around the edge. You don't need to worry too much about making it perfect, because once the backing paper comes off, it's completely transparent and you won't see those edges. Once it was cut out, I soaked it in some lukewarm water for about 20 or 30 seconds, I think. I just kept checking it to see if the picture would slide off the backing paper. And once I could see that it would slide off, it was time to put it into position and slide it onto my fridge magnet. Once it had had about an hour to dry, it seemed like it was stuck, kind of. It wasn't brilliant, it just wasn't sticking as well as I would like it to. And I think it's maybe because it's just quite old, I've had it for a long time, or maybe it's just not a very good brand, I'm not sure. But there was something in the back of my mind when I was planning this project telling me not to use it because I had problems last time. But I ignored that voice in my mind and I carried on and then kicked myself. But don't worry, we solved the problem in the end. You'll see soon what happened. So once it was dry, I decided to add Mitch's name to the top, and here it is on my transfer paper. I cut it out on my Cricut machine, and yeah, I just didn't think this one through. I got it on there nicely, as you can see, but can you see what's just happened? Yeah, Mitch lost his ear. As soon as I started peeling off the transfer paper, so did I peel off Mitch's ears. So I had to start again with that. I took the image of Mitch off, cleaned it up and added a new image which I quickly printed out and started again. But this time, to make sure the same thing didn't happen again, I took some UV resin, also from Let's Resin, smeared it over the image with my gloved finger and then cured it under the UV lamp. And then I added the name again in the same way as before, and it was absolutely fine this time. Right, it's looking good. All it needs now is that final, very thin protective layer. I don't have much space on there for putting the clear resin, but it did need protecting. So I mixed up some epoxy resin from Let's Resin and then very carefully applied it to the top. And like I said, I did need to be careful again around the pore. I just added a little bit and used my micro brush to coax it into all the little nooks and crannies without touching the pore pads. And yeah, it took a little bit of time, but it was good in the end. And here it is the next day when the top coat was nicely cured and it was all finished, and I think it looks quite cool. And so yeah, I'd been really curious about what would happen if I tried this, and it did do what I thought it would do, because when you press down the main part of the pore, the little parts all bulge out because it's encased in the resin and it's got nowhere else to go. It has to bulge out from those parts, and it works really well. I think it's so cute. And I realise it's a little bit thick, isn't it, for a fridge magnet? But they're strong magnets, and so it worked okay. The thing is, it needed to be thick to fit the pore in there and get that base of it covered. I suppose really if I did it again, I could pour a fresh pour, pour a fresh pour, but not do it the full depth of the mould, and then I wouldn't need to make the bookmark as thick, would I? So that's an idea. Maybe another time, because we had another lovely cat and I would like to do one of her as well. So yeah, I'm really happy with the results, and it was a bit of a different idea, wasn't it? If you've enjoyed the video, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you would like to. And I will see you again next time. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.